sold by her aunt for debt. The crooked sheriff took the orphan who refused to beg. Chapter 1. The Price of Desperation. The Texas sun beat mercilessly on the dusty streets of Copper Ridge, a border town where hope seemed as scarce as honest lawmen. May Sinclair stood on the warped wooden porch of her aunt's ramshackle house, her calloused hands gripping a worn leather satchel that contained everything she owned in this world. 16 years old and still eating my food, sleeping under my roof, Aunt Cordelia spat, her weathered face twisted with resentment. Your daddy left me nothing but debts when he died. And your mama? Well, she was always too good for this family anyway. May's jaw tightened, but she kept her green eyes fixed on the horizon where heat waves danced like ghosts. She had learned long ago that arguing with Cordelia only made things worse. The gambling debts had piled up like tumbleweeds against a fence, and May knew this day would come eventually. Jasper Crowley's been patient long enough, Cordelia continued, counting the crumpled bills in her trembling hands. $47. That's what you're worth to me, girl. Sheriff Langston's already agreed to take you on. Says he needs help around his place. The irony wasn't lost on May. Sheriff Amos Langston was known throughout Copper Ridge as a man who bent the law like horseshoes in a forge, shaping it to fit his needs. His saloon, the Crooked Dollar, served as both his unofficial office and the town's den of inequity. As May walked down Main Street toward the sheriff's office, townspeople peered from behind curtains and whispered behind gloved hands. Mrs. Henderson, the preacher's wife, shook her head disapprovingly. Old Pete, who swept the general store, tipped his hat but couldn't meet her eyes. The sheriff's office sat like a fortress at the end of the street, its adobe walls scarred by years of desert winds and occasional gunfire. May pushed open the heavy wooden door, the hinges groaning like wounded animals. Sheriff Langston looked up from his desk, his steel-gray eyes appraising her with the cold calculation of a cattle buyer. At 42, he still cut an imposing figure, broad shoulders, silver-streaked hair, and hands that had seen their share of violence. His badge caught the afternoon light streaming through the window, but May noticed how it seemed tarnished, like everything else in this godforsaken town. "So, you're Cordelia's niece," he said, his voice carrying the authority of a man accustomed to being obeyed. "Heard you've got some fire in you. That true?" May lifted her chin defiantly. "I work hard, Sheriff. I don't steal, I don't lie, and I don't beg." Langston's mouth curved into something that might have been a smile. "We'll see about that, girl. We'll see about that." Chapter 2. Testing the waters. 3 weeks into her servitude, May had established a routine that kept her busy from dawn until well past sunset. She scrubbed the saloon floors until they gleamed, tended to Langston's prized black stallion, Thunder, and prepared his meals with whatever provisions she could find in his sparse kitchen. The work was hard, but May had known hard work her entire life. What grated against her spirit were the constant tests, small cruelties designed to break her pride and force her into submission. "This coffee tastes like mud," Langston declared one morning, dumping the entire pot onto the floor May had just mopped. "Clean it up and make it again. And this time, don't burn the beans." May bit back her response, knowing the coffee had been perfect. She had watched her mother make it the same way hundreds of times. Instead, she knelt and began cleaning the mess, her movements efficient and purposeful. But Langston was watching her face, studying the way her jaw set with determination rather than defeat. Something flickered in his eyes, surprise perhaps, or grudging respect. The townspeople's treatment of May ranged from pity to outright hostility. Some saw her as a victim of circumstance. Others viewed her as a reminder of their own moral compromises. The saloon girls whispered cruel jokes about the sheriff's little slave, while the respectable women crossed the street to avoid her entirely. Only Dr. Samuel Morrison, the town's aging physician, showed her genuine kindness. When May delivered Langston's lunch to his office one afternoon, she found the doctor treating a young Mexican boy who had been injured in a fall. "Hold this steady," Dr. Morrison instructed May, handing her a bandage. "Gentle pressure, just like that." May's hands were steady and sure as she helped treat the boy's wounds. The doctor noticed her natural aptitude and began teaching her basic medical skills during her brief visits to his office. "You have good instincts," he told her one day. "Your hands know how to heal, not just how to work." These small moments of human connection sustained May through the darker hours when Langston's demands seemed designed more to humiliate than to accomplish any real purpose. One evening, as May was balancing the saloon's books, a task Langston had assigned to test her literacy, she discovered discrepancies that revealed the extent of his corruption. Bribes from cattle rustlers, protection money from traveling merchants, kickbacks from the railroad company. The numbers painted a picture of a man who had sold his integrity piece by piece. When Langston found her still working by lamplight, he expected to find her overwhelmed by the complex calculations, Instead, May had organized everything into neat columns, her careful handwriting transforming chaos into clarity. "You can read and write better than half the men in this town," he observed, genuine surprise coloring his voice. "My mother taught me," May replied simply. She said education was the one thing no one could take away from you. For a moment, something vulnerable flickered across Langston's weathered features. "Smart woman, your mother." Chapter 3. When Honor Calls. The trouble arrived on a Tuesday morning in the form of 3 riders whose dust cloud could be seen from miles away. May was grooming thunder in the stable behind the sheriff's office when she heard the thunder of hoofbeats and the jingle of spurs. The Cortez brothers, Miguel, Carlos, and the youngest Diego, were known throughout the territory as men who took what they wanted and left destruction in their wake. They had been demanding tribute from border towns for months, and Copper Ridge's turn had finally come. May watched from the stable as the 3 men dismounted in front of the sheriff's office. Miguel, the leader, wore a silver-studded vest and carried himself with the arrogance of a man who had never been told no. His brothers flanked him like hunting dogs, hands resting casually on their gun belts. "Sheriff Langston," Miguel's voice carried across the dusty street, "we need to discuss the tax situation in your fine town." May saw Langston emerge from his office, his own hand hovering near his weapon. The tension in the air was thick enough to cut with a knife. "Cortez," Langston nodded curtly. "Heard you boys were working your way down from El Paso." "Business has been good," Miguel smiled, but his eyes remained cold. "Very good, and we're here to make sure it stays that way. $500 a month, Sheriff. That's what it costs to keep your town peaceful." May could see the calculation in Langston's eyes. $500 was more than the town's entire monthly budget. It was extortion, pure and simple, but the Cortez brothers had the firepower to back up their demands. "That's a lot of money," Langston said carefully. "Consider it insurance," Carlos chimed in, his scarred face splitting into a grin. "Insurance against accidents." As the negotiations continued, May noticed movement in the shadows between buildings. More men, at least 6 of them, had positioned themselves around the town square. The Cortez brothers hadn't come to negotiate. They had come to take what they wanted by force if necessary. That evening, as May prepared Langston's dinner, she could see the weight of the decision pressing down on him. He sat at his desk, staring at a bottle of whiskey but not drinking from it. "They'll be back tomorrow for an answer," he said without looking up. May set his plate down carefully. "What will you tell them?" Langston's laugh was bitter. "What choice do I have? I've been taking dirty money for years. Why should this be any different?" "Because it is different," May said quietly. "This isn't about bending the law anymore. This is about letting evil men destroy innocent people." Langston finally looked at her, and May saw something she had never seen before in his eyes. Shame. "You think there's still something worth saving in this old lawman?" he asked. May's voice was steady and sure. "I think a man who tests a girl's character for weeks instead of just breaking her spirit might still remember what it means to protect people instead of preying on them." Chapter 4. The reckoning dawn broke gray and ominous over Copper Ridge, with storm clouds gathering on the horizon like an omen. May had barely slept, and she could tell from the sounds coming from Langston's office that he hadn't slept at all. When the Cortez brothers returned, they brought their full gang with them, 9 men in total, all armed and ready for trouble. The townspeople seemed to sense the danger. Main Street was unusually quiet, with most folks keeping to their homes and businesses. May was sweeping the front steps of the sheriff's office when Miguel Cortez approached, his spurs ringing against the wooden planks. "Well, well," he said, his eyes roaming over May in a way that made her skin crawl. "Sheriff's got himself a pretty little servant. Maybe we can work out a different kind of arrangement. The girl's not part of any deal." Langston's voice cut through the morning air like a blade. He stood in the doorway, his badge polished to a shine, and his gun belt sitting properly on his hips for the first time in years. Miguel's smile faltered slightly. "Sheriff, I hope you've had time to consider our generous offer." "I have." Langston stepped fully into the street, his hand resting on his gun butt. "And my answer is no." The silence that followed was deafening. May could hear her own heartbeat thundering in her ears as the 2 groups of men faced each other down. "That's unfortunate," Miguel said softly. "Very unfortunate indeed." The gunfight that followed was swift and brutal. Miguel went for his gun first, but Langston was faster. Years of corruption hadn't dulled his reflexes. The sheriff's bullet took Miguel center mass, spinning him around before he collapsed in the dust. Chaos erupted as both sides opened fire. May dove for cover behind a water trough, but she could see Langston pinned down behind a wooden post, outnumbered and outgunned. Without thinking, May grabbed the shotgun Langston kept behind his desk and ran into the street. Her first shot scattered 2 of the Cortez gang members who were trying to flank the sheriff. Her second shot shattered the window of the general store, sending glass raining down on Carlos Cortez. "May, get down!" Langston shouted, but she was already moving, using the confusion to reach his position. Together they held their ground as the remaining gang members realized their leader was dead and their advantage was slipping away. One by one they began to retreat, dragging their wounded with them. When the smoke finally cleared, 3 men lay dead in the street, and the rest of the Cortez gang was riding hard for the Mexican border. Dr. Morrison emerged from his office to tend to the wounded, while townspeople slowly began to venture outside. May stood beside Langston, both of them breathing hard, both of them changed by what had just happened. "You could have run," Langston said quietly. "Could have hidden until it was over." May looked at him with those steady green eyes that had never wavered. Not once in all the weeks she had been in his custody. "So could you." Sheriff Amos Langston reached into his vest pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper, the contract that had bound May to him. Without a word, he tore it in half and let the pieces flutter to the ground. "You're free, May Sinclair," he said. "Free to go wherever you want, be whoever you want to be." May looked around at the town she had come to know, its flaws and its possibilities, its broken people and its hidden strengths. Dr. Morrison was waving her over to help with the wounded. Mrs. Henderson was actually smiling at her from across the street. Even old Pete was nodding his approval. "I think I'll stay," May said simply. "This town could use someone who knows how to stand up when it matters." Langston's smile was the first genuine one May had ever seen from him. "Yes, ma'am, I believe it could." As the sun broke through the storm clouds, casting golden light across the dusty streets of Copper Ridge, May Sinclair walked toward her new life, not as a servant or a victim, but as a young woman who had proven that sometimes the strongest chains are the ones we choose to break ourselves. The orphan who had refused to beg had found something more valuable than freedom. She had found her place in a world that desperately needed people willing to stand for what was right, no matter the cost.